You may have cleared the roster of Elden Ring Nightreign and beaten all 8 Night Lords, but have you beaten all of the Everdarks? These are the more challenging hard mode bosses with a Phase 3 that is exclusive to a limited time mode. We're going to be ranking all of the Everdark fights from easiest to hardest, and there is no Everdark Hailster as far as we can tell. I don't think there's going to be a final boss for the night aspect, no Phase 3 for that, but if there is, then I'll be sure to add it to this video at some point. But to begin here, what I think has to be the easiest Everdark boss overall in Nightreign has to be the Dark Drift Knight or the Everdark Fulgore. I would say that, because all of these bosses start in their Phase 2, meaning once you kind of clear that section, you get to their brand new Phase 3. And to be honest, this might be kind of a crazy statement, but I actually think Fulgore's Phase 3 might honestly be easier than Phase 2, and I think that has to do with the Knight arm, like this Abyss, that he's using right now. That goes away, and he gets restored to his normal glory. But when he does that and that arm goes away, I feel like a lot of those big AoEs disappear and he gets reunited with his normal, like, holy double-sided sword. Now, this is a very strong sequence of attacks, don't get me wrong, like, this can be very devastating as well. And he has one of the most powerful attacks in the game, which is to go up into the air and fire a giant AoE explosion arrow down from the sky. But this is very telegraphed. It can be quite easily avoided because the windup takes like 15 seconds. You have a kind of a long time to get out of the way, and as long as you manage to do that, even though these moves are spectacular and they're very flashy, I wouldn't say they're that hard to really dodge. Of course, this flurry of attack has a ton of hits, and you can either try to just roll through and dodge most of it, or you can completely run away and outspace that sequence, and it has a pretty long cooldown. There are some very obvious punish windows at the end of a lot of these attacks and flurries, so as long as you know how to disarm either and outspace his flurry attack and then get out of the AoE, he actually can't really do a whole lot to you, and you've kind of made him null and void. He can shoot arrows into the sky, which just follow, very loosely to the player. These can be easily sidestepped as well. He doesn't really actually have a lot going on, and the more I think about it, I think, the Everdark fight might be easier than the base vanilla fight in the game. I don't know if that's a crazy statement, but that's how I feel. Anyways, up next is the Everdark Adele, Baron of Night. So this one obviously begins in Phase 2, and unlike almost every other Night Lord, I would say that specifically bringing in their elemental weakness is a good idea. I really don't think in the Everdark fight specifically, poison is really going to get you that much mileage here. I think speccing into something like Frost or even Bleed is just going to be far better. Even though you might get another punish window here or there, I think overall you're going to get more damage out of, those other status ailments. But regardless, Phase 2 isn't that difficult to deal with on Adele as long as you know where to be positionally. Phase 3 gets really interesting, and I think that's where a lot of people got tripped up, because the gimmick of this is not anything like we've seen before. At some point, he's just going to disappear, and then after a few seconds, he will reappear at a different point in the stage and then begin to circulate this funnel around you. And this funnel is absolutely lethal and will kill you in a matter of a few seconds if you don't quickly find a spirit stream and then jump through it and then go over the eye of the funnel. You need to get right to the center where he is to remain safe, and this will kill you if you don't react to this fast enough. You only have a few seconds to get in that spirit stream, but once you know that that's the gimmick and you know where to be, then this move can be quite easily avoided. And the other thing is that Phase 3, he gets a few more ground hitboxes from a lot of his slam moves compared to Phase 2, which, obviously is more dangerous than not, but it's still kind of the same fundamental pace of fight. I will say that the funnel walls can obscure a little bit with what's going on, and it does reduce your amount of viable play space a little bit, but it does go away after a little while, and he can summon this again. But once you know what to do in response to this, it's really not that big of a deal at all, and you may not take any damage from this, so it's not too bad. And I would say that this is, again, one of the biggest spectacle fights visually. Don't get me wrong, though, getting caught by a move is utterly lethal in this fight, but they're so slow and telegraphed. You can respond to these via pigeon mail. It's you have so much time to react to stuff that it's really not even a challenge. But it's an amazing fight. I think the pace is awesome, and it's one of my favorites personally, even though I don't think it's that hard. All right, next, I'm not really really sure where to put this one. I feel, depending on who you ask, they would put this either at the very top or at the bottom. I think this is either going to be a literal one and done for you, or you're going to be stuck on this for weeks, and maybe you've never beaten it. But this is the Everdark version of Augur or Maris, and this is perhaps the most different Everdark fight in the game. And yes, technically you do start with like normal Augur phase 2 or whatever. I mean, this phase 1 of this boss is not even really meant to be a boss. You annihilate its health bar so quickly that you have to know something's up. Of course, this is not the fight you're preparing for, but when you kill the first phase of Augur, then you'll be given a weapon, and if you're paying attention, it is the Stormcaller all the way back from Demon Souls. And if you've played that game, or even if you've played Dark Souls 3, you probably know what's coming next. So the whole idea with this fight is that Maris comes back bigger and with more powerful attacks, a couple of different AoEs, there are some bubbles that chase you, and it's an overall more intense version of what Augur is in the main game. However, what you have now to deal with is Stormcaller, and you can basically charge it up to summon a giant wave that does a fair amount of damage, or alternatively, you can swing it a little faster and also try to like deflect and bat down some of the attacks that Maris will throw at you in this fight, because a lot of them are very powerful, but you can kind of swat them out of the sky and deal a little bit of damage to Maris. But I would say the problem with this fight is not the fact that you're using Storm Ruler and they kind of want you to play it this way. I just feel that it's kind of strange that to get back to this boss, right, it's like a 40-minute run back essentially. You have to play the whole run, and your build more or less really doesn't matter. I mean, the weapons that you use or some of the passives that you have in effect, sure, they can make a minor difference, but by and large, the weapons or everything that you spent your entire game trying to build craft around pretty much doesn't matter as soon as you get Storm Ruler. Also, not to mention, the fight goes on really long. I was playing co-op games and gave up because it was simply taking far too long. The boss run was almost equivalent to my entire, first 2 days to get there. It was kind of insane, and my solo run wasn't much faster, but this is not my favorite fight. Like, I get the idea, and again, it's a visual spectacle, it's nice, and I would say it is hard to some degree, but maybe not for the right reasons, and I just don't really quite agree with essentially nullifying your entire build and making so that doesn't matter through the whole game. It essentially all boils down to your efficiency with Storm Ruler. Is it my favorite Everdark in the game? Absolutely not. Is it hard? I would say it is, and maybe you could debate about whether that's a good or bad thing for this fight, and whether this is a good or bad Everdark. I'm not sure. I think the community is pretty split on that, so I didn't really know where to put it on this list. I would say that you could put this at the top or bottom or somewhere in the middle, and it would probably do just fine. All right, up next is Caligo, Miasma of the Night, Everdark. So unlike the, normal version of this fight where you get a couple of seconds where she peers through the fog and you can start dealing damage to her, this one begins immediately, and she's usually in the air already throwing out an attack. So the gears have already got to be running, and you've got to be prepared from the first second you start. And I would say that Caligo Phase 2 is obviously very lethal. Some of her moves are some of the highest damage dealing in the game, but at the same time, a lot of her moves can be easily avoided as long as you know where the AoE radius is for many of these, but you have much less time to punish now. Now, of course, Caligo and the element that she uses in her fight is all about frost, and I would say that the Everdark fight specifically, the frost buildup is so brutal that it pretty much makes the shifting earth event, the mountaintop, required, because getting that gift once you complete like that shifting earth raid will give you a ton of frost buildup resistance, and I would say that like you probably aren't going to be able to do this one very easily without it. It's almost a requirement. You can try to go in without that shifting earth gift, but you're going to end up looking like Patrick from that episode of SpongeBob. He's got the snowball. Like, that's going to be you. You're going to be eating so much frost buildup, it's just going to feel frustrating throughout the whole fight. And I would say that a fire-infused weapon is also a necessity, because Caligo takes a massive amount of fire damage and is incredibly weak to it. So you are really handicapping yourself if you're not bringing in a fire weapon. But if you do manage to do that and you actually successfully get her out of Phase 2 in, or what might be considered Phase 1 in the Everdark fight, you will get the special Phase 3, in which she'll get Arctic armor. Now, to be fair, she doesn't get a ton of just totally brand new or different moves to learn in Phase 3, but everything does get far more lethal, and the radius of a lot of her AoEs get bigger and just much more dangerous. But you have to play around that because you must break the armor to deal any real damage to her. Now, they kind of work like plates, right? They cover different sections of her, so you kind of want to focus on one until you can fully shatter it, and then you can start dealing what would be your normal damage to the exposed spot. But the Arctic armor can take a little while to chunk through, and also a fire-infused weapon does amazing against this. But in spite of all that, it's still kind of the same game plan. You need to weave in and out and punish when you can get armor breaks on Caligo, and you need to avoid the massive, frost funnels that she will spawn as well. These are pretty difficult to dodge because they move very quickly, but once again, the, frost resistance buildup from the shifting earth should do just fine here. This one can be pretty tough if you're not properly equipped. I would say it's also one of my favorite Everdarks in the game, period. I think this one is fantastic, and it's also, fairly challenging. Coming up next is the Everdark Sentient Pest, or Noster Wisdom of Night, and once again, because it starts in Phase 2, you don't get that opportunity to fight them when they're individual and split off. They immediately conjoin and then usually throw out giant AoEs to begin the fight. Now, I've beaten this Everdark fight with most of the Night Lords, but I really prefer using Duchess for this one because her maneuverability is so good that you can actually just sidestep most of the most dangerous moves in this boss battle, period. And you can kind of like make this a joke if you want, but if you play this with a different character, somebody who's not as maneuverable, you might have a harder time. Now, Noster is exceptionally weak to fire, just like Caligo was, so you definitely want to bring that in here. But the difference is the Phase 2 of this fight, the health pool doesn't feel as, chunky to take down as it does in the normal fight, but that's because it's not over yet. The big kicker here is that Phase 3 is kind of like Ornstein and Smo if you crossed it with Lorien and Lothric from Dark Souls 3. So it doesn't have like a totally unique phase depending on which one you kill first, but it kind of can be infinitely resurrected if you don't kill Animus, which is the spirit that revives this creature. Now, I always think it's most advantageous just to go after the beetle and just to be under it, because once Animus starts taking over, when you kill either the butterfly or the beetle, Animus will come in to revive one of them, and you have a small window here to deal massive damage to Animus, and most likely he's going to revive whichever one you killed first, and then you need to take them down again within a minute, otherwise Animus is going to start using his own set of moves, which includes giant AoEs. So this, I would say this fight is really about a DPS check. Like, you need to be dealing tons of damage to keep Animus busy enough so that he's constantly reviving either the butterfly or the bug. If you can do this, then you can start to chip away at Animus's health and then get big punish windows once you actually take down either the beetle or the butterfly. And once again, fire damage is extremely powerful here, but you want to sort of avoid the moves as they get much stronger if Animus has taken them over. I think this fight is optimally challenging and it's so much fun. It's got to be one of my favorite Everdark fights, and I do think it's pretty hard. Now, I would say that it's a little bit different in solo versus co-op, as is the case for many of these bosses. I think it's far more manageable in solo because it's really all about you and how you want to like manipulate the multiple, entities going on in here. You can kind of stay under the beetle. You're more or less safe, minus the giant AoEs that the other two butterflies will be spawning. But it's an awesome idea, a great gimmick, and it's just a ton of fun. I would say that overcoming the challenge in this fight is extremely satisfying, and I felt great about it, whereas like compared to Maris, I was kind of just happy for that fight to be over. I didn't feel as much satisfaction from beating that one, but definitely this is one of the most gratifying Everdarks you can beat. Next up is Everdark Libra. Now, I don't even really know where to start with this fight because it's the most technical Everdark fight in the whole game. There is a lot to unpack that's going on here. I didn't expect this one to have so much complexity, but they really went all out for this one. Now, Libra, I would say, is like definitely one of the more challenging fights, even just as far as the normal variants go, and you can fight this as a field boss. He has a slightly limited moveset, but he's always a fair challenge, and I think this is some of people's favorite Night Lords in general. So how does the Everdark stack up? Now, of course, you do sort of begin the fight as normal. You make a deal with him, and that is still intact because later on, once you get him to about like 80% health, he'll actually enter his next phase in which he can start summoning NPCs that are just like you, that have these predetermined builds that you also now have to deal with during the fight. I would also go so far as to say once you hit this point in the fight is when it becomes a very different experience solo versus co-op. If you're playing a full team of co-op and all the NPCs are in, there is a lot going on in this arena. But if you're playing solo, like visually, a lot of things are just easier to manage, but you need to be looking out for stuff like status effects. You need to see what Libra is doing. He'll be a little bit more passive when the NPC is spawned in, but still, you cannot completely write him off. The other major difference when he enters phase 3 is that it's kind of funny, but he'll no longer ask you if you want to partake in these deals. A lot of people, once they're fully set up, don't participate in any of the deals because obviously, as the equilibrious beast, he is obsessed with fairness, and with every sort of potential upside comes with a major downside as well, and normally people choose to forego that if they know what they're doing. But at this point, he just doesn't ask anymore. He just does it for you. He will force these deals upon you that you then have to respond to, or you'll die. Honestly, there are so many little things that can happen in this fight and different mechanics that might occur during your battle that beating this to some degree is RNG. I know a lot of people really don't like this fight, but maybe that's kind of like meta true. That's what they wanted to do. I think, it's essentially split right down the middle. A lot of people completely hate this fight or they absolutely love it. And that's just like Libra would want it to be. Perfectly balanced, as all things should be. But I don't know. I think this fight is definitely more manageable in solo because you just have much less variables to deal with. Co-op is a completely different story, and especially if you're playing with a full squad of 3, this is something entirely different. But with all of the mechanics going on, I just think that it's a very impressive fight. And as far as I've been able to tell, I believe this has the lowest completion rate out of any Night Lord. That might be just because how new it is, but also just because this one is quite challenging, and most people playing in co-op are going to significantly struggle with this one, I would imagine. But I would say that this goes neck and neck with the final Everdark Night Lord. I wasn't sure which to put as number 1, but this one is going to have to go to Everdark Gladius, or the Tricephalos. This was the final Everdark Night Lord that got put into the rotation, and ironically, it's the first Night Lord that everybody begins Nightreign with. And I think it's kind of a poetic way to end, because I don't know about you guys, but I personally had the most challenging time with this specific Night Lord compared to all of the other ones before it. Yes, even Libra and even Maris. I think the thing with this fight in particular is that as primarily a solo player, I feel, comparatively, this one is more challenging, where, doing co-op runs obviously makes the health pool a lot bigger and can make some of these fights quite tough. But I actually think that Everdark Gladius is easier in co-op, which is kind of a wild statement. In solo, this can be very brutal, especially in phase 1, dealing with all 3 of the separate dogs. The strategy that I found works the best is just try to run away to separate them, because if you're close enough to all 3, the AI on every single one is just going to be attacking you at the same time, making it almost impossible to deal with. But bringing in a holy weapon has its benefits and its drawbacks, because even though you can get some bigger punish windows and some debuffs throughout the beginning of the fight, if you use a holy weapon, you will actually buff Gladius a bit later on. I think what makes this fight really hard is that in phase 3, when he actually combines back into a single being again, you get the full Cerberus with the sword, then he starts getting massive AoE attacks that are quite similar to like Hailster's AoEs, and they can be dodged and dealt with in the same way. So if you have a lot of experience with that boss, it actually might come in handy here and could provide some, beneficial experience to deal with these moves. But when you get the full Cerberus that is buffed up now, this is where it gets extremely lethal, because even as a level 15 Wilder with a ton of health, you can consistently get one-shot by so many of these moves. The only person that can really tank through a lot of the most devastating wave hitboxes is pretty much Raider. I mean, that's the only one that has enough health, just overall to eat some of these. Otherwise, you are dying to these just basically in one shot. It's actually not that much different mechanically, even from the vanilla version of this boss battle, but what makes it particularly challenging is just how hard everything hits. Once again, even being level 15 and having just as much HP as you can have, you're still no match for a lot of these, AoE attacks and stuff like that. You will just get obliterated. This fight may not be quite as technical as the Libra Everdark or nearly as gimmicky as the Maris fight, but I would say that this is a good balance of making a intense, fast-paced battle with hard-hitting moves that you need to know what to do and how to respond with. I just think that this boss might hit a little bit too hard. Getting one shot as Wilder level 15 isn't the most fun thing in the world, but that'll happen sometimes. Any kind of weapons you can find in your run that give you like physical damage resistance or especially fire damage resistance are going to make a massive difference here and could be the difference between life and death. Even if you have all of this damage resistance though, the odds that you get one shot with most of the characters are pretty high. Again, the only one who can really tank these is Raider, fully upgraded, and that might not even be enough sometimes. So if you bring in 3 or 4 Wending Graces here, you'll probably still chew through a lot of them if you're playing solo, because just getting hit by one of these moves is essentially instant death for you. But it's a fair fight. I think it's well balanced. I don't think it's unfair in any sense of the word. It's just challenging, and it is tough. And it was really difficult to decide whether I think Libra should be considered the hardest for the Everdark fights or if it's Gladius. But at the end of the day, I'm going to have to say it is Gladius 100%, unless we get an Everdark Hailster, which, you know, the streets say that we might get one because there is an icon in the game for him, but there is no official music, I don't believe. And also, I don't think that they've officially announced if an Everdark Hailster is coming. I think this is probably more setting up for what they're doing in the DLC or even these hard mode expeditions. But I think once they add all of the Everdarks to a single rotation, then we'll kind of really know for sure which one is the hardest. Anyways, let me know what Everdark you personally think is most challenging, and perhaps we'll have something surprise us when the DLC comes out. And make sure to subscribe for DLC coverage for this game, as I will have plenty of cool stuff coming your way when that does drop. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.